Hello everyone, this is Ashley Tucker. Thank you for joining me today. Today I'm joining My Favorite Things for their Wednesday Sketch Challenge. If you're not sure what that is, every Wednesday on the My Favorite Things blog, they release a sketch that you can use for inspiration for a card. Once you make that card, you can upload a picture of it to the website and you'll get a chance to win something. It's usually a gift card to the My Favorite Things store. And I'll put a link to that blog down below so that you can check it out. It is a great way to get some inspiration for your cards. So when I was looking at the sketch for this week, I thought that it really looked like an envelope, and that inspired me to make a trifold card so that there's a flap that opens up on the front. As you can see, I have a pretty big piece of Bristol smooth paper. This is 5.5 by 12 3/4, and it needs to be that big because this is going to be a trifold card. Alright, so let me just catch you up to this point. In the beginning of the video, you saw me use a pencil to add some marks onto the paper, and I was just marking out where the folds are going to be when this folds up. I then used those pencil marks as a guide so that I knew where to place things. The first thing that I placed was an oval piece of masking paper on the right-hand side of the page, and I just wanted to mask off an area so that I have a place to write inside the card. The next thing that you saw me do was to place that paper in my Misti tool so that I could stamp the dragon image. That dragon is from the Magical Friends stamp set from My Favorite Things, and I stamped it with Gina K Designs Jet Black Amalgam ink. I then stamped that same dragon onto a piece of masking paper, and then I used some scissors and fussy cut the dragon out so that I could mask off the dragon on the background. Okay, so that pretty much catches you up to this point where I'm doing some ink blending to add these clouds to the background. Now normally when I ink blend clouds, I like to start at the top of the page and work my way down. But for this page, because it's so long, I decided to start at the bottom and work my way up, and I did it really lightly so that I could just get an idea of where those clouds were going to be. Once I had all of my clouds laid out, I then worked my way back down and I went over the blending a second time to darken it up. I actually found this part kind of fun because it's a little bit like a puzzle. You have to figure out exactly which part of the stencil you used and fit it into place. Once all of that blending was done, I removed both of the masks and I was left with nice clean areas underneath. At this point, I went ahead and added my score lines for all of the folds. I didn't want to do it before this because if I did it before this, then that ink blending wouldn't have looked as clean. And I just used my score buddy to do this, and I scored 4¼ inches in from each of the sides. In order to let my card fold up really nicely, I just took a sliver off of the right-hand side with my trimmer. I folded up the card so that I can work on the front of it, and I added some pencil lines so that I know where to cut with my trimmer. This is where the sketch inspiration really comes into play because I'm going to trim down the front flap of my trifold card into this really interesting shape. After I cut this, off camera, I stamped a bunch more images from the Magical Friends stamp set onto a piece of Neenah Solar White cardstock with Gina K Designs Jet Black Amalgam ink, and then I moved on to my coloring. I'm going to be using Copic markers for all of my coloring. It's a little bit different from what I usually do because this first dragon is on Bristol smooth paper, and I normally do all of my Copic coloring on Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock. Now the reason that I used the Bristol smooth paper is because this is such a large size, and Bristol smooth paper is the only paper that I have that I could make this size with. I could have stamped this dragon on a separate piece of paper and then glued it into the card, but because this is a trifold card and there's a lot of bulk to it already, I wanted to minimize that bulk as much as possible. All that being said, I didn't have any issues coloring on the Bristol smooth paper with my Copic markers. I do prefer coloring on the Neenah with them, but the Bristol smooth paper works just fine. You just need to make sure that you let your ink dry really well before you start coloring because it is such a smooth surface. It does take inks a little bit longer to dry. One thing that you might notice that I struggled with a little bit with the coloring was getting my two greens to blend together really well. And that's just because of how far apart those two colors are. And that's also because I don't have a lot of Copic markers. So sometimes in order to get a good blend, I have to really kind of force it. One of the tricks that I use to do this is to take the lighter color marker and touch the tip of it to the tip of the darker marker and then color with the lighter marker on the area. And this helps to blend the colors a little bit more. Alright, so this card has a lot of coloring involved, and I don't like to take a lot of it out because I know a lot of you like to watch the coloring. So what I'm going to do now is turn on some nice relaxing music for you to chill and just enjoy the coloring. And for those of you that it's not really your thing and you don't really want to watch coloring, that's totally fine. You can skip ahead to the 12-minute and 25-second timestamp, and that's when we will be moving on to the next part of the card. Alright, so once all of the coloring was done, I moved on to creating the backgrounds on the front of my card and on the inside flap of my card, and for that I'm going to be doing some ink blending. I have a piece of masking paper that I freehand cut with some scissors into this hill shape, and I placed that on the front flap of my card, and I'm going to be blending with some colors of Distress Oxide ink. I'm using the colors Twisted Citron, Mowed Lawn, and Lucky Clover, and I'm creating some really nice green hills. Once I finished that first hill on the front flap of the card, I placed that same piece of masking paper on the inner flap of the card, and I made sure that this hill will line up with the hill that I did on the front of the card when it's closed. Next, I covered up the hill on the front of the card so that I could add a second hill on top of it, and for that I'm using the same exact masking paper just at a different angle, and I'm using the same colors. And you'll see that I did have the masking paper lift up a little bit on the bottom, so I did get some of that dark green area in the wrong place, but I will fix that later and I'll show you how to do that. Again, using those same pieces of masking paper, I'm adding a second hill to the inner flap, and again, I'm making sure that this hill lines up with the hill on the front of the card. In order to fix my mistake, I just replaced the masking paper and went over again with the same colors of Distress Oxide ink, and because I'm using the Distress Oxide ink, it's very easy to cover up those mistakes. For the sky on the front of my card and on the inner flap, I'm using Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink, and I'm just blending that down from the top and leaving a little bit of white above the hills. I decided to add a little bit of color to the Thought Bubble clouds, so I took two different colors of Copic markers and I blended those around the bottom side, and then I took my colorless blender and I blended out from the center so that I could kind of blend in that color with the white area in the center. And those colors that I used are R20 and E00. Next, I took the two small cloud images from the stamp set, and I'm stamping those in the sky on my card using some black ink. For the thought bubble that's going on the front of my card, I stamped one of the really tiny sentiments with VersaFine ONYX black ink, and then I have this other thought bubble that I stamped, but for this one it doesn't have the little tail on the bottom, and I stamped a second sentiment onto that one, and that one's going to go on the inside of my card. I popped up the little girl and the dragon image on the front of the card with some foam tape, and then I have this sentiment which I heat embossed on black cardstock with white embossing powder, and I glued that on with some liquid adhesive. I took the thought bubble sentiment and I glued it so that it looks like the little girl is thinking, and then I took my second thought bubble sentiment and I glued it to the back of the first one so that it's on the inside of the card. I glued down the little castle image that I colored, and I put it on the hill so that it looks like it's far away in the distance. Next, I have the small little dragon. I didn't show the coloring for this dragon, and that's just because I colored it exactly the same way that I colored the other two dragons. So if you saw how I colored those, then you know how I colored this one. And I glued that so that it's on the inside flap of the card, and you can't see it when the card is closed. I used a white gel pen to add highlights and details to all of the images on my card. You actually saw me do this already with the dragon on the inside of the card, so now I'm just adding it to the rest of the images. I also filled in all of those little clouds so that they are white. I think my favorite part with the gel pen was adding the little dots to the wings on the dragons, because I really feel like those dots make the wings look like they are kind of sparkling, and it makes them look kind of magical. Because the light is very clearly coming from behind all of these images, I thought that they needed some shadows, so I took a really light gray marker and I added in those shadows. And then to finish up the card, I took my Wink of Stella glitter brush and I went over the sentiment. Here's a look at the finished card, and you can see what it looks like when you open it and when you close it. This card definitely takes a little while to make, but it is totally worth it in the end. Thank you for watching today. I hope you really enjoyed this card design. Make sure you check out today's sketch challenge over on the My Favorite Things blog. It is a great way to get some inspiration and you might even win something. All of the supplies that I used for this card can be found in the description down below, as well as a link to that blog. Again, thank you so much for watching today, and I'll see you next time.